7 Action News, always taking action for you.
And we begin tonight with GM's new CEO getting grilled on Capitol Hill about what the automaker knew and when they knew it about its faulty ignition switches.
We do have Team 7 coverage for you on the GM recall investigation. Ross Jones is in the nation's capital, but we're going to begin with 7 Action News investigator Heather Catallo, who's live in our newsroom right now with the very latest on Mary Barra's testimony. Heather?
Well, Mary Barra repeatedly said she knew nothing about the ignition switch failures, which was a frustrating answer for the congressional investigators because she has been at the company for years. But Barra did insist that General Motors will be cooperating fully with the federal probe, and she says the culture in today's GM is totally different.
GM knew about the defect in the ignition switches as far back as 2001, 13 years before the recall, correct? Yes or no will work.
The investigation will tell us that.
Did, in fact, GM inform NHTSA that the ignition switch had been redesigned?
I don't know that.
After only a few months in the driver's seat of General Motors, CEO Mary Barra frequently had to say, "I don't know," on Capitol Hill today. Barra insisted that up until January, she knew nothing of the ignition switch failures in GM's small cars that are now linked to 13 deaths, even though company records indicate the automaker was getting reports of the cars suddenly shutting down on the road for at least a decade.
Do you think there was a cover-up or it was sloppy work?
That is the question I've asked Mr. Valukas to uncover, and I'm anxiously awaiting the results from his study.
Barra has hired former U.S. Attorney Anton Valukas to figure out how the company failed to alert federal authorities about the faulty ignition switches that were never made to GM's requirements.
With all respect,
No, but
what you just answered is gobbledygook.
But
it's your own specification. It's your company's specification. If a part doesn't meet the specification, why in the world would you not refuse it and only accept a part that meets a specification?
there needs to be a well-documented process.
How can GM assure its customers that new switches to be installed beginning April 7th will finally meet GM's requirements?
Thank you.
We are working very closely with our supplier. Our executive director responsible for switches is personally looking at the performance of the new switches. We will do 100% end-of-line testing to make sure that the performance, the safety, the functionality of these switches are safe.
Congressional investigators are also grilling the head of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration about why they did not open an investigation sooner.
How did NHTSA not identify the deadly trend?
Congressman, when our team looked at the data, the trend there was not a trend that stuck out. In fact, when it came to airbag non-deployments, the cobalt was not an outlier.
Family members who lost loved ones in Chevy Cobalt crashes also listened to the testimony today in Washington. They had photographs of their children who died lined up along the wall in the hearing room. For them, the apologies and the recall of 2.6 million cars so many years later is too little, too late. Reporting live in the newsroom, I'm Heather Catallo, 7 Action News. Stephen and Carolyn, back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Heather.
Let's head on out to Washington, D.C., where Mary Barra has just finished facing reporters there.
7 investigator Ross Jones was at that meeting where questions were coming hot and heavy. Ross, what did GM CEO have to say?
Well, she certainly wanted to get out of the face of those questions as soon as she could. Good evening, Stephen and Carolyn from Capitol Hill. Mary Barra gave very generic answers. Sometimes she said she just didn't know the answer to many of our questions, just as you heard her say inside the hearing room. That frustrated a lot of congressmen and women, and it certainly frustrated so many of the families who filled up that hearing room, and I witnessed shaking their heads in disgust when they weren't crying. However, when she did talk to reporters, she did face some of our questions, including some from me.
How could you have not been aware of the defect? And if you really weren't, are there other defects you're not aware of right now?
I became aware of an issue that was being examined. I didn't know of the specific issue in December of 13, late December of 13. I became aware of this specific incident on January 31st after the recall team made this decision.
Was customer safety not a priority before? Was customer safety not a priority before?
I know what I'm focused on today. I can't speak to...
But you worked for Jim for 30 years.
You heard Mary Barra say many times throughout her testimony that today There's today's GM and there's the old GM, but she did not mention that she has been a part of the old GM for the better part of 33 years, including over the last 5 or 6 years, she was one of its leading women officials. But now she says it is a new day at General Motors. She also pointed out that no one so far has been fired as a result of this ignition defect. That may change soon, but so far no one has lost their job. Stephen, back to you.
Oldest question in the book, what did you know and when did you know it? Ross, thank you for the live report. And Ross is going to join us again live tonight at 7 with more on today's testimony.